Chapter 8. There was something to revere. Remembering the trees of Weiner. Even as a child, I was fascinated by the special trees I saw as friends. The silver leaf maples in our yard were too tall for my sister and me to climb, their first branches impossibly out of our reach. I thought their leaves were beautiful, especially when a breeze caused them to flutter from green to silver. Many of the bumpy roots of those trees ran across the top of the ground, making mowing a challenge for my daddy and sometimes causing Mama to stumble. I knew my parents were not the ones who planted them. Besides, their size testified they were there long before we were. Underneath their shade, my sister and I spent hours playing on our swing set day after day, something my two girls and my grandchildren seemed to tire of after only a couple of months on theirs. The silver-leaf maples that sheltered our swings flickered green and silver above our heads, their canopy magical as we soared to meet the leaves overhead. Sadly, those silver-leaf maple trees of my childhood home were cut down after the house was demolished. I know of only one other silver-leaf maple tree in Weiner today. My Grandma Walker lived across the bayou. When I was a child, the gravel roads to her house were bumpy, always kicking up a fog of dust behind our car, except when it rained. I leaned eagerly over the front seat as we neared what I called my tree tunnels. Then I slid back to look out and up the side window for what I knew was coming. I like to think the tops of those tall oaks reached over to hold hands, just for me. Entering, their cool green light followed us until it gave way again to colorless brightness beyond. I knew exactly where the tree tunnels were. Today, those tunnels are gone, and the gravel roads are bordered by clean ditches and open fields. When I was a child, fields dotted the wooded landscape by my Grandma Walker's house. One sunny day, my cousin and I convinced Grandma Walker to let us walk barefoot in the field next to her house. It had been recently plowed in preparation for planting, and the heavy rain the day before left it nice and muddy. The goo felt cool as it squished up between our toes. We felt like explorers as we walked and walked, laughing at the sucking sound each time we pulled a foot free from the muck. After a while, we could feel our skin starting to burn in the sun, so we stopped from time to time to coat our legs, arms, and faces with mud. I noticed that Grandma's house was nowhere to be seen. On either side of us and in front of us, tall woods had gradually walled us in as the field curved. Afraid, we retraced our steps, waiting for Grandma Walker's house to come into view. When it finally did, it was so far away it looked tiny. We followed the tree line back, knowing we might be in trouble when she saw that we were covered in mud. Today, the woods that border that field by my Grandma Walker's house have been cleared and are now the place of open fields that stretch on as far as you can see. When I was a child, Grandma Walker had a huge weeping willow on the side of her house that was perfect for swinging. We would gather a bunch of the trailing branches in our hands, run fast, and then jump out as far as we could, letting the straining vines pull us back to where we started. Many leaves were sacrificed amid the laughter of her grandchildren, but the tree thrived. It was only after the grandchildren were grown that the tree began to die. Perhaps it missed the touch of small hands and the joy of play. In November 2009, my students recreated the harvest celebration shared by the early colonists and the Wampanoag that we remember each Thanksgiving. There were costumes, homemade dwellings, and period props from that time and place. The Wampanoag village, seen in a picture on this page, was set up behind our house, south of the pond in a narrow tree line that borders a field. The children's eyes lit up as they stepped into the woods. Other than a few who went hunting in the fall with their fathers, most had never been, as one child said, surrounded by trees. Image: a drawing of large trees with prairie grass around. What might John Phillips have thought when he saw a field of prairie grass bordered by virgin timber? What would it have been like to go back and walk through the big oaks of Weiner and see what he saw? What might it be like to feel the cool, moist air and smell the scent of wood and earth? To look up 100 feet to the top of an unbroken canopy that splintered the sunlight into soft, gleaming beams of hazy light? What would it be like to hear the gentle calls of birds and perhaps the trickling of a nearby stream? To be in a place where time froze and witness something that had endured for centuries? I can imagine being there. I remember my silver leaf maple tree flickering from green to silver. I remember passing through the oak tunnels bathed in green light. I remember standing in a clearing, following the woods as it led me onward. I remember swinging through the air, tightly clutching a tangle of friendly, weeping willow branches. I know the friendship of a child and a tree, and I can imagine myself running through the prairie grass, about to enter the shaded world of those long-ago trees. As settlers moved westward, clearing land became a vital part of the expanding frontier. It was a way to transform what many saw as wilderness into productive farmland capable of supporting families and strengthening local economies. Farming formed the foundation of a good life in our area during the 19th and early 20th centuries. Clearing land not only provided a livelihood for farm families, but also created jobs in town that supported the entire community. Following the War of 1812, estimates suggest that 96% of Arkansas was covered in forest. The impact of the settlers on these forests was slight at first, but it began to escalate with the coming of the railroad, an escalation that intensified in the following decades as more and more land was cleared for farming. Today, some estimates report that only 7% of Poinsett County remains forested. Remembrances of sawmill days and clearing land. My baby sister passed away in 1933, and we buried her up there on Walker Cemetery. But there wasn't any road up there then. We went through a field in a wagon. The woods back then weren't as thick as they are now. They're grown up in the underbrush now. You can't hardly walk through them. But back then, those trees were so big, no sunlight could get through them. They were wide open underneath. Elmer Cooper, 1924 to 2017. There was a lot of woods. Our house was surrounded by forest until they started clearing it for farmland. Alma Wolf, 1922 to 2020. There were some of those trees as much as 6 feet across. You had a 6-foot crosscut saw, and you had to take the handle off to saw the tree down. You just sawed around the tree. From my house all the way to over there, that was all woods. All the roads through here were just trails. Buddy Swartz, 1923. A lot of it was virgin timber around here. When W.A. Westerman's dad, Arthur Westerman, bought his ground, there was a sawmill at Grubbs. We were cutting some big cherry bark red oak and big white oak trees. We told the sawmill man that we had a cherry bark red oak that must have been at least 5 feet through. Would he saw it for us? We were then hauling logs on a rubber-tired wagon made out of a 1.5-ton truck that had a dual-wheel axle on the back and front that you could pull with a tractor. The sawman said, "Boys, you get that log over here and I'll saw it." We finally got the tree down and got it cut up into, I believe, 14-foot logs. We hooked chains over a log, pulled it with a tractor, and rolled it up on the wagon. When we got that one 14-foot log on that wagon, we couldn't put any more on it because there wasn't room. We hauled that cherry bark to the sawmill. I remember it was getting near lunchtime. There was an elderly woman who would fix dinner in her little house by the mill, and for $1 you could buy your dinner. We pulled the log into the sawmill yard, went over and ate dinner. When we got back, the sawmill man was measuring that log. He said, "Bobby, where did you and W.A. get that log?" I said, "Up there northeast of the house." He said, "That's the largest tree bark I've ever seen." I reminded him, "You said if we could get it here, you could saw it." Then he said, "How'd you ever get that up on the wagon?" I said, "Well, we put 2 tractors to it and skidded it up the wagon." Now, that sawmill man only had a 52-inch saw. He couldn't saw through that log, so what he had to do was start cutting off of the side of it. He kept cutting pieces off the side and rolling that log until he finally got it down to where that 52-inch saw would reach through it. Bobby Lynn, 1926 to 2025. Kenneth and Hugh Keller used the crosscut sawing method to clear their land, one tree at a time. The crosscut saw is a long, straight blade with large, specially designed teeth. The teeth alternate in shape. Some are cutting teeth, while others are rakers that clear the sawdust. This ensures that the blade doesn't get stuck. The process requires 2 people, one on each side of the saw. Each grips a handle and prepares to pull rather than push the saw. The length of the saw caused deep cuts in a single motion, making it quicker than using smaller one-man saws or axes. It took hours to fell a tree. Kenneth's wife, Juanita Huber Keller, often awoke to the sound of sawing before daylight. She usually heard the brothers' satisfied yell, which was always followed by a deep, groaning crack of the falling tree and the earthquake shaking of the ground. Next came the work of cutting the huge branches and using the mules to drag the logs to a burn pile. The brothers used a stump saw with a Ford Model A motor and transmission to get rid of the stumps. The stump saw was a circular attachment that cut through the tough tree stumps that were difficult to remove by hand. The rest of the stump was then dynamited. One tree among 390 acres of trees required hours. It took the Kellers years to clear their farm. Ray Keller, born 1950. Image: a photograph of an early sawmill. In the past, clearing land was known as slashing. When we cut timber for farmland, we made sure the tops of the trees all fell toward a center. After they were down, the trees went through what we called the heat and the sweat, allowing them to dry out. Once dried, we set fire to the pile, burning it from the center outward. Any wood that didn't burn was cut up and stacked by hand. My father cleared 13 acres like this, all by hand, with the help of a team of horses. Those horses worked hard. Bobby Lynn, 1926 to 2025. Photograph and caption: sawmills were scattered all around Weiner, providing both cross ties for the railroad and much-needed income for families. Men living in the foothills of the Ozarks sometimes came down and worked in the mills. Low-quality timber not suitable for cross ties was used for building, firewood, and other purposes. Clearing timber for farmland would come later. My dad told me there was a railroad track leading into the woods northeast of our farm at Cooper and Haynes. It was here there was a big sawmill. They'd bring in the empty flat cars on the tracks to the mill and load up the cross ties, moving them back to where they were working. It was more efficient than hauling on wagons. Gary Walker. My dad's dad, Big Grandpa, died when they were cutting timber. A tree fell on him. My dad was 12 years old then. Dorsey Block, born 1943. Before the railroad came, the sharp echoing ring of a broadaxe cutting into hardwood marked the slow, patient work of clearing land for a homestead. Each swing sent a clean crack through the stillness, a rhythm of muscle and steel against stubborn timber. But the sound changed with the arrival of the railroad. Now came the whine of steam-powered saws and the clatter of belts from the sawmill, louder, almost constant. Trees no longer fell just to make room for corn or pasture. Timber became a commodity needed for the cross ties that would build the railroad tracks. Then, when the trains were running, farmers saw new opportunity to expand their farm acreage. The flat, rich ground that once held trees now held levees and water, perfect for rice. Clearing land was now about scale, as larger and newer rice fields transformed this area